You boys and girls, hello, this is Pablo with a new Meditation Amsterdam video. I haven't made one in quite a while. I've been doing some very deep emotion work and exploration of my own. And as usual, I come back from the depths of that stuff with some new little insights that I want to share with you guys. So in today's video, I wanted to do a very short clip to explain the notion of feeling like you're an infinite being or feeling infinity or realizing infinity or your unlimited nature, whatever you want to call any of those things. But as usual, I want to do it in a colloquial language and in terms that would be easy to understand and very sort of simple and not that debatable, so that we come to terms with it. So what I drew is a little simple diagram where we have an individual over here. As you can see, his face is sort of slightly puzzled and confused, not particularly happy or unhappy, but just kind of doing his own thing. And over here, what we have are what you could call personal boundaries or personal views of the world. And they are going from the narrow to the broad. So you could imagine that in the spiritual development, this arrow, the arrow in this direction is an arrow of time and mental and spiritual cultivation. Yeah, so the individual sort of follows this kind of path. Yeah. And over here you have the person's body, as a matter of fact, obviously, right under the head. So what I'm trying to depict here is that at the beginning of the path, we start with a very narrow view of ourselves. And by narrow, I mean that the kind of ways in which you define yourself are incredibly specific. So I don't think anybody of high education likes to any longer define themselves, say, by the place in which they were born, for example. But still, so you could have someone very narrowly define themselves as, hey, in my case, say I'm Guatemalan, and my being Guatemalan creates a certain narrow view of the world. So the area in which I can play is defined by the limits of how I define myself as having a certain nationality. And so if you follow that logic, you would very quickly see that at the start, especially when your ego is forming and you're trying to learn how to be functional in the world, it helps to have a kind of narrow scaffolding that tells you, hey, listen, you were born in this place, you are the son of so-and-so, your dad followed such a career, so you will also be a doctor or something along those lines. You have a certain political affiliation. This is the football team that you support, and so on. So this is a very, very narrow way to define yourself. It provides a certain framework of safety for your mind, but at the same time, it precludes you from acting comfortably in certain situations. It also precludes you from seeing certain things accurately, and it also, let's say, precludes you from being comfortable with certain realities that are part of the world, right? And now, through life, some of these boundaries are more or less naturally expanded. Now, that's another situation that we have going for ourselves. See, the expansion of boundaries is a painful affair, and I mean emotionally painful. So that, once again, we have the depiction of our central channel, throat, chest, belly, hips, pelvic floor. I'm not purposefully drawing the chakras here or anything like that. It just happens to be like that. So every time our boundaries get hit by a situation from life, one of these will flare up. So there's a kind of correlation between the way in which we define ourselves and the things that we are emotionally comfortable with. That doesn't sound very strange, right? So that's pretty obvious. Now, the other thing that is interesting to notice is that, let's say, dropping your favorite football team, although who knows, right? Like what's going to trigger you more, but some of these sort of more pedestrian, more sort of what would you call it? More provincial ways in which you define yourself start to get eroded a little bit quicker, and they may not be as confronting as that. So, for example, if you were used to, I don't know, your local food, and you knew that you were, Italians are very given to this, by the way, so, if you're watching. But say that you're used to Italian food, but if you start to travel enough, then you get to try all these other things, and you come to realize that there's great food all over the world, and suddenly you feel the sense of expansion. So, that might not be a very triggering situation. And you start to move towards a more expanded view of the world, in which, okay, so I was born in Italy, but guess what? I'm broad when it comes to my taste in food. Boom, right? So suddenly you expanded your sense of self. But then you come across the next way in which you are defining yourself. And as you progress in a more sort of, you start to do emotional work, or you start to do cultivation of the mind, you're going to start to come across things that are, on the one hand, more intangible or more implicit. So your nationality or your taste for food is a very sort of explicit type of thing. Excuse me. But so nationality, tasting food, whatever. But how about your gender identity? That starts to hit home a lot closer, doesn't it? Right? Like, when a guy has, let's say, suddenly a little feminine feeling about himself, and suddenly your entire world starts to become like shaken in kind of funny ways. Or when you start to realize that you may not be as monogamous as you take yourself to be when you gave your wedding vows, that starts to really trigger deeper areas of your sense of self, and the individual feels threatened, emotionally threatened, unstable, unsafe. If you go even further than that, so we went from something very pedestrian, something very trivial like nationality, to something like sexual preferences, for example, or things like that. But then as you meditate more and more, you start to broaden your definition of self to say, well, I define myself normally as a person, but actually maybe I now just define myself as awareness, observing a person, right? So, that triggers something even deeper in yourself, and so on, right? So even like your very survival instincts start to be shaken by those kind of things. And then maybe at some point you go, well, maybe I'm not even awareness, but just like this ongoing unfolding or whatever. And, something even deeper gets triggered, and on we go. The gist of this whole thing is that there is something in you that needs this process to keep you feeling safe, but there is also something in you, and it might be back to like Maslow's pyramid of needs, in which eventually you want to, there's something in you that wants to feel infinite and self-transcendent and completely free. But there are all these buttons being pushed because there's something in you that also wants to feel safe. Right, so that's the push towards like this infinity push versus the safety, and they're in this constant tug and conflict. And meditation or spiritual practice is to find a healthy, controlled, but also systematic and ongoing way to resolve those things, so that eventually what happens is you start to see every single thought and every single emotion as your drive towards infinity coming across a definition of yourself. And therefore, the taste of infinity, or feeling infinite, right, feeling one with the infinite or whatever, is nothing other than the cessation of your self-definitions. So when you define, you are not infinite, right? So the infinite has no definitions. And in that way, infinite, to feel infinite sounds like, esoteric or new agey or fluffy or whatever, but it is nothing other than the absence of defining yourself in certain ways. Now, those definitions don't need to disappear. Notice that over here, for example, the example, hey, I was born in Italy and therefore that's my nationality, or I was born in Guatemala. I don't need to lose that. What I need to lose is the emotional pulling and pushing that I feel when I try to go past that definition. So we are not, in a sense, trying to eliminate the way in which we define ourselves. We just want to be able to go through all the way in each direction without feeling that our emotional and bodily and mental well-being is being threatened. That's freedom. That's real freedom, actually. Regardless of where you are, what you're doing as a job, whether you have a partner or not, whatever, freedom is being able to be able to operate beyond and through any definition that you gave yourself. And then it's very clearly seen that self-definitions on a mental level are being held by emotional triggers in the body, and that once the emotional trigger in the body is resolved, this can still live on a mental level, but you can go through it without any problem whatsoever. So that's it. That's the gist of the video. It's this idea that feeling infinite is not about, that means that I don't know, can travel to the moon with my mind, or, strange things that people start to ask. No, it simply means that you don't define yourself in any way whatsoever. It's also a very tall order, by the way, because the mind, your mind will start to make stories about why that is not safe, and your body will definitely respond with feelings of not being safe. But the more you can learn to sustain the discomfort of the process and to come across your mental and emotional barriers, you start to create breathing room for your life, essentially, and it gets super broad up until the point where there are no limits for you anymore. And you are, in essence, infinite, even if it doesn't, it's not a magical thing of any kind. It's very easy to explain with this little model over here. So I hope that gives you something to think about, also something to look forward, because the more you go in this direction, the cooler life becomes. Obviously, you're not triggered by pretty much anything anymore. And also, I hope it gives you some kind of framework to place the practice of meditation and body and breath work in a context of attaining more freedom and living a cooler life, essentially. So I'll be back with more. Cheerio.